Hello, hello, hello. It's been a little while since we've had some time together. I just paused for a quick second, no worries. Um, I wanted to just get on here really quick, just to say a little bit before I invite my guest on. I am partnering with a organization that I am on their advisory board, and honored to be so because they spend their time talking to young people. And by that, they mean ages 13 to 25. And this conversation that they asked me to have, they invited me to have, is with Gen Zers who are politically motivated, who are very civically engaged, and I'm going to be inviting them on. And it's an important conversation. Let me know if any of y'all can't hear me out there. I think I have my sound turned up. But y'all, Gen Z is voting. I am going to vote with my child. We are going together to vote. And that is wild to me that that's where I'm at in my life. And that's where, if you're a parent out there of a Gen Zer, you know what I mean. But I think this is a beautiful moment for us to have some intergenerational conversations. I am super excited to hear how they are feeling, and super excited to introduce you to Springtide. Got one. Is there anyone else? Accept. Um, Hi.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you?
Jaclyn, I'm waiting for everyone else to make their request to join. So as soon as I get those, I will let them in. But while we're here, I just want to talk a little bit about Springtime. So you guys, I'm on the board with a lot of smart people who spend a lot of time researching and talking to people um, who are young people, 13 to hey, out to vote HQ. That would be Ranen. Ranen, just request to join and I'll let you into the chat. I am super, it's one of the things I'm most proudest of, is because I have such a love for this group of people. And it's not just because I have a kid who is a Gen Zer, it's because I've just, when I worked at a church down in Austin, a lot of the people that I encountered were in that generation, and I've kept those relationships. So it's very important to me to know how they're feeling. And there are a couple of them that I actually have these, we get together on Zoom and we just check in on FaceTime with one another. But you guys are doing a different kind of work. Let me just go grab out the vote. There we go. Um, so for you parents out there, for you educators, for any of you, hello, any of you who are working with young people, here's what I have to say. Follow Springtide, follow the podcast, because they actually have these podcasts where they talk to young people, and buy the research. It's $20, and I have loved having it because it's helped me to know how to connect, even in my feed and even with how I write on my blog. But if you're actually in classrooms or in therapy sessions, I think it's really good information to have so that you can hold a wider view, because you don't know until they tell you something just how old you are. No, I mean, but like seriously, like you don't know just how different their experience of the world is until you actually have the conversations. And if you're not, and there's a lot of conversations that you're not going to have. Hi, voters of tomorrow. There you go. I'm going to let you in just a second. My kid doesn't want to sit and tell me all the things. I'm sorry. They're 22. Got things to do. So we're going to have this wonderful conversation. And I hope you guys get a lot out of it. Okay, so once I get our last party person for the party live, we'll get going. Hello. Okay, so we have Jaclyn Doherty, and she's Dr. Jaclyn Doherty, and you are the research associate with Springtide Research Institute. And I've already told you about Springtide, so you know what they do. We have Ranen Miao, who is the co-founder, oh my gosh, co-founder of OutVote. And OutVote is a youth-led organization building a culture of civic engagement in the LGBTQIA plus community. You guys know that that's a big part of my heart, having a trans non-binary child, and that's my world. So happy to have you here, Ranen. Marianna Pecora is the communications director at Voters of Tomorrow, and they are a Gen Z-led movement that engages, educates, and represents young Americans in politics and government. I just went ahead and did your introductions because having done so many of these, I know how quickly people are just like, pass. So want to get into the juicy juice. This is a nonpartisan conversation. This isn't us endorsing anyone. This is us just talking about word on the street with Gen Z and civic duty and engagement in this election cycle. So if you're coming here with your guns blazing, you can put them back in your holster. No need for any of that. We're not having that conversation. We are simply just talking to Gen Z about who are actually working in civic engagement about um, what they're encountering and their thoughts. And it's important that we do this because I think a lot of us were taken by surprise about how many Gen Zers care about climate, or when they showed up at George Floyd protests and the recent Palestinian, and we're all like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Well, this is why we have to have the conversations, y'all. So I'm going to get started. And I just, again, want to reiterate, we are talking to Gen Z, but Springtide has research from ages 13 to 25. Some of the things that they've already done is, let me just find it in my notes right here. They've done the state of religion and young people in 2023. That's post-pandemic, so that's a great resource to pick up. Exploring the sacred, navigating injustice, a closer look at race, faith, and mental health and Gen Z, what educators need to know. So go to their website for all that. This is based on their latest study, which is cultivating care and how and why people participate in civic life, which is why it's nonpartisan, people. Some of y'all know my political views, but this is not that. This is nonpartisan, not even bipartisan, nonpartisan. So get with it and let's have the conversation, because you can't just rely on Chappell Roan and Taylor Swift for your information. You need to talk to the actual people. Okay. Um, so my first question is, Springtide just did this research in 2024. They just released it, just published it, Cultivating Care. And they found out that while only 13% of young people ages 18 to 25 report having voted in the past 12 months, and some of that probably has to do with age. They were 17 when they, before. 49% say they have voted in at least one federal, one state, or local election. Even more, 61% say they plan to vote. 61% of the young Gen Z people between 18 and 25 that Springtide talked to said that they plan to vote in this election. Um, if the turnout in November comes close to these numbers, my kid has already told me, not everyone's like me, mom. Some people may be distracted by a breakfast taco. Some people, I'm just like, well, heck, we relate because that's my generation too. We get distracted. So hopefully that won't happen. But if those numbers are true and it comes close to that, this would mark an unprecedented level of young voter participation, particularly between 18 and 25. So, what are you guys hearing when it comes to ideas about voting, whether people plan to vote or not, ignore that breakfast taco and walk onto the polls? And what are some, well, I'm going to ask that this first part, and then I want to know what are some of the efforts your organizations are doing to get people out to vote, especially when it comes to Gen Z. And I'm going to start with Marianna. If you could just start by answering that, what are you hearing, and then how is your organization helping with that movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first things that I think is really important to touch on with what you just mentioned is that young people are really excited about voting. We do see young people wanting to participate in this election in really high numbers. But like you said, there are a lot of barriers to voting, specifically for young people. Not just thinking about like getting distracted by a breakfast taco, but thinking about the fact that a lot of people are students, they're in college, maybe they're away from home, they can't go vote in person, they have to request that absentee ballot. Or maybe they're voting in the place where they go to college and there isn't a polling place on their campus that's easily accessible or
Right.
somewhere that's walkable or close by. So there are a lot of barriers to voting for young people. Even voting ID laws, some states don't allow you to use a student ID. Again, maybe you're from a different
Mhm.
state and you don't have access to the ID that
Right.
you need. So there's a whole lot of different barriers to voting when it comes to young people that we really need to make sure that we're making them aware of that information. And also, we need to make voting more easy and accessible for young
Amen.
people, right? So,
Yes.
absolutely, barriers to voting are a real challenge when it comes to young voters. But then it's also thinking about how campaigns and essentially like the political class has typically thought of young voters. We are thought to be a low propensity voting bloc, but in the last couple of election cycles, that hasn't been the case, right? We've seen young people turn out in record numbers in 2018, in 2020, in
Amen.
2022, in special elections in states across the country.
Right.
And so young people really aren't a low propensity voting bloc anymore. We're a bloc that is showing up and a block that's growing in power and in numbers. And what that means also is that we can be the deciding
Right.
factor in these elections.
Right.
Young
Right.
people can be the margin of victory. So we're also seeing an increase in campaigns treating young people less like low propensity voters and only reaching out in maybe the last 3 weeks during that GOTV time,
Yeah.
and really investing in young people earlier than ever before, which is a huge deal. And it's the goal of organizations like Voters of Tomorrow as well. So, to get into some of the work that we're doing this cycle to make sure that young people have those tools that they need, we have teams of students on the ground in over 25 states right now, in campuses and communities across the country that are doing that outreach to the people in their communities, that person to person basis, high traffic canvassing, high traffic voter registration efforts on places like college campuses, giving young people those tools that they need and that information that they need, and telling them about what's at stake in this election. And then we also have our national voter outreach program where we're sending uh, millions of texts and calls to young voters across the country,
Yeah.
essentially giving them, again, information about registering to vote, finding your polling place, information about candidates on the ballot, and making sure that young people have those tools that they need when they do get to the ballot box. The other thing that we've seen with young people is that if you give them the information and the tools, you tell them how and why they need to be exercising their power, and they know what's at stake in this election, if they have the option to vote, they are going to vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just have to make sure that people have those tools and have that information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And again, voters at Voters Tomorrow. You can share their information, put it in your stories. I do a lot of that. Will you also answer the same question, Ranen? What are you hearing, particularly in your community, and then also outside of your community, because a lot of us are still coming to the LGBTQIA plus community as allies. What are you hearing from young folk? And also, how is your organization reaching people, or what are you doing to help bring people to that ballot box, or give them information that they may need to make the decision on whether they're going to go to the ballot box or not?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this conversation and having this really important conversation right before the election. I would say a few things that I'm hearing on the ground are pretty salient. Number one is that LGBTQ are scared about this election. Over 85% of trans people in this country are worried about the future of not only their healthcare access, but also whether or not they will be able to participate in sports, whether or not we will be extended the dignity of being able to adopt, whether or not we'll have the same equal anti-discrimination protections in the workplace and in housing that other demographics have. This is something that is on the ballot in 2024. And as Gen Z, where 28% of us identify as LGBTQ, it is increasingly important that we connect the dots between these policies being passed and the power of our vote. One of the things that one of our mentors told us is that if our votes didn't matter, then people would be away from us. So I think young people are nervous, scared about the future of some of these policies, and I think that's really going to galvanize people into the box. The second thing that we're hearing is that there is a lot of energy in this election. There's a lot of excitement around candidates, and I would say that this excitement is not just about the top of the ticket, but all the way down the ticket. A lot of people who we're talking to are mostly mobilized by hearing about local and statewide candidates in which they can support them and be able to make tangible changes in their communities. We really applaud the amazing work that VOT is doing. We don't have as many states that we're operating in, but in Arizona and Pennsylvania, Arizona has an abortion referendum on the ballot in 2024. This is going to be people who care about reproductive freedom and for whom reproductive rights are a critical voting issue. So when you tell young people, not only are you voting for candidates who might be imperfect, but you are also voting for issues themselves, people are much more likely and engaged and excited to turn out because they recognize that by going out and voting, they're able to have a direct say in the policies of their state and how those are going to be impacted and influenced as an outcome of the election. The third thing I would say is all across young people and Gen Z voters, we're hearing a lot about how important this election is going to be for them. Because on the federal level, whether it's the Supreme Court or abortion rights or marijuana legalization or climate change or gun violence prevention, we know that young people care about these issues. And we know that these are also intersectional issues because the LGBTQIA community includes people who are impacted by gun violence, like we saw in Orlando. And includes people who are disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system, who are being incarcerated and are being denied access to gender-affirming care. It includes immigrants who are trying to come to this country or who have family members who are coming to this country and who are experiencing the types of rhetoric that we're hearing from the presidential candidates and nationwide about immigration. So when we're talking about LGBTQ issues, we recognize that it's a racial equity issue, it's an rights issue, it's an justice issue. And we're talking about it in this way so that we are able to include everyone, because historically, the LGBTQIA movement has excluded trans and gender expansive people and people of color. So it is our goal to make sure that this movement is inclusive and representative of everyone. Having that message is exciting to people, it is energizing them, and it is giving them hope that we are going to be able to really make an impact in this election, both on the local level and on the national level.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I know how my followers are, and I will be inviting the three of you back, like individually, because there's so much that you talk about that, there's not a day in this home that we don't talk about these things. Dr. Jaclyn Doherty, I have recognized that in this generation, and these answers that have just been given prove this, I wrote that I know for a fact that this generation is more than who they listen to and what they watch. They are deeply thinking, deeply feeling, critically thinking, and it's different to me than any other generation. I always say to my kid, I probably didn't vote until I was 30. I just didn't, it wasn't, I didn't under it. We weren't as connected. We didn't have social media. I love what I'm seeing in this generation. Jaclyn, I was saying, how are you experiencing this in regards to research? When you're talking to young people, how this age group, especially because you guys are trying to be as inclusive as you can be with your research, how are you even navigating that?
So with our research, we really make an effort to have a nationally representative sample. So to whatever extent possible, both in our survey work and also in the interview work that we do with young people, we are trying to reach every corner of the country and every type of person in terms of identity in the country. So we have spoken with a lot of different young people with a lot of different types of backgrounds. And, I'm hearing a lot of the things that Ranen and that Marianna are saying, and that's really resonating with me as I think back to the survey data that I analyzed and the interviews that I conducted. When thinking about voting, a lot of young people were thinking about civic duty. So having this responsibility as a US citizen to, get their vote out there. They thought a lot about, this is an opportunity to voice. They spoke so passionately about so many issues that they care about in our country and things that are going on with folks in our country. And this voting was really an opportunity to express that voice and to have that heard. And then they also talked about privilege, which I think touches on what Marianna was saying, where, they were telling us that I get to vote, I have this opportunity to vote, and that is a privilege for me. It's not something that everyone in the world has the opportunity to do, and it's not something that everyone in this country has the opportunity to do. So I think in a lot of ways, young people, when they're thinking about voting and when they're, going out there, they have this sense of responsibility, this sense of empowerment with voting, and then also a sense of privilege that they have the opportunity to have their voice heard, especially for the issues that they care about so deeply.
Wow.
If I could hop in for a
Yeah.
sec, I also
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
I think it's also, this is something I really encourage people to do. I think it's really important to think about the world that Gen Z grew up in and how it's different than the world that previous generations did. Marcie, you mentioned social media,
Yes.
but also the way that politics has been for young people's lives, for the duration of young people's lives, I think is really important to think about as well when we are thinking about why Gen Z is caring so much about this election, why Gen Z feels so personally attached to these issues, why we feel like this is something that we can really have power in. Yes, we are the generation that grew up with social media, with access to information, with more connectivity than ever. But we also have grown up politically, at least, in a really challenging time. I'm
Yes.
20. This is the first presidential election that I get to vote in. I'm very excited about that. But I was 13 the first time that Donald Trump ran for president. So for the entirety of Gen Z's real political upbringing, political life, we've seen a version of our politics that to older generations feels foreign. It feels like something new and different and something that is just not the norm. But for Gen Z, it is. This is the politics that we have grown up in. And I think it's really important to think about the fact that we do feel like this is really existential. It is a part of our everyday lives because we're seeing it in the news every day. It's breaking through into non-political conversations, into the culture. Things like SNL, something that's fun and exciting, but also tapped into politics in the news where you're getting that information there and you're hearing about all these things that are going on. Or even this year, we've seen Charlie XCX and Chappell Roan and Taylor Swift become a part of a political conversation as well. And that means that information about politics is reaching young people who maybe aren't politically engaged or involved to the level that someone like me at Voters of Tomorrow or our wonderful network of chapter folks is. They're still getting bits and pieces, and they're bits and pieces that aren't the way that politics has historically been.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that. And even just I'm a huge RuPaul Drag Race fan, and just seeing so many, because drag is on the ballot.
Absolutely.
So seeing so
Yeah.
many drag queens band together to put out a message to get people out to vote. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ranen? I want to not on the drag race, but on what Marianna said about just born into it, literally just born into it. And then to speak on, like, you know, you guys went through a pandemic during your most precious tender years. So just how has that also informed you? Because it's just always been part of the conversation.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm always happy to talk about Drag Race if you want to talk about.
We'll do that when I have you back. We will do all of that.
Organization that we're actually partnering with called Drag Out the Vote, and they're doing great work around educating people about how drag shows are in fact on the ballot in so many places across the country. So that's just a side plug for Drag Out the Vote. But I definitely agree with you know, what we've been saying about how Gen Z is growing up in a completely different culture. I mean, even talking about LGBTQ issues, this year we saw an unprecedented level of anti-LGBTQ legislation introduced across the country. 530 bills. We're seeing increasingly the ways in which gender and sexual orientation are being policed and being restricted by organizations, including the Olympics, for example, when we're trying about the ways in which athletes, usually athletes of color, Black athletes, are being regulated under these laws that are trying to determine who is or is not legitimately a man or a woman on the basis of testosterone and estrogen levels. I mean, these regulations and this onerous level of restriction, the type of backlash we've seen at the types of progress we've been able to make on things like marriage equality, transgender equality, is really, really disturbing, and I think is making groups of people who just want to live lives and work jobs and go to school now have to become political actors and be part of this ongoing battle to just be treated with the dignity and respect that every single one of us deserves to be treated with, regardless of our identity, regardless of how we identify, who we love, what we look like, what religion we practice or don't practice at all. That is why I think young people are uniquely motivated, and I think that those experiences are going to continue to compel us to turn out and to vote for our interests, because we recognize that our identities are being politicized even against our will.
Yeah, that is, I have to have you guys back. That's just as simple as that. I want to talk about some of the things that Springtide found in the research. Just what were the issues that your generation, they found 18 to 25, were considering when it comes to voting. Selected abortion and reproductive issues, 34% said that was a concern for them. The economy was 27%. Education was 20%. You know, we had this big Supreme Court ruling for affirmative action that affected a lot of how we feel about education, and we've seen a lot of book bans. Other issues were the gun policy. You are a generation that I never had to do a drill of getting under a table or hiding in a corner for a school shooting. 50%, education topped the list at 55%, and abortion was a close second at 50%. Climate change, 45%. And I want to know, what are you hearing from, you talked a little bit about some of the concerns, but what are if you could just tell me, what are the top two political social issues that seem to repeat for the people who follow in your comment section or in conversations that you're having, and how might their interest or care lead them to participate? Well, we've covered that. It is the interest that's bringing people to the polls. But what do each of you, and I'll start with you, Jaclyn, in your circle, find the two top issues are that are going to bring people to the poll? And I'm saying two, but no one's going to cut you off if you got more than that.
Yeah, I mean, at Springtide, the primary way that we listen to young people and take in this information is through the surveys and interviews. So So yeah, definitely the things that you mentioned that came up in our survey. So the top 3 issues that came up when young people were thinking about voting. So of course, there are a lot of issues that they care about more generally. But when we asked about voting in particular, what are your top 3? Like you mentioned, abortion, reproductive issues, the economy, and education came up as the top 3. And then I'll say also in the interviews that we had, those issues came up there as well. Young people talked about them very passionately. But there were also, some other issues that came up that you might not hear as much about, like privacy concerns and technology. So while that might not be everyone's like the hill that they're going to die on or the thing that they want to talk about a lot, I think there are kind of these general issues like education that a lot of people care a lot about. But then there are also little pockets of other issues that certain young people care a lot about. So we definitely saw a breadth of those. But like you were saying, the survey did indicate those top 3. Yeah.
I'm going to come down to you, Ranen, because my kid's terrified. When you said scared, I'm like, my kid's not worried. They are really scared about what's going to happen with this election, being trans and non-binary, not knowing. We live in a blue state. There are some protections, but none of that is guaranteed, as we have seen. So what are you hearing are concerns within your community for votes? You have to remind me,
Oh,
I'm old. Okay, OutVote. Okay, will you tell us, like, what are the 2 top concerns that you guys are encountering?
absolutely. And want to echo Jaclyn, and I'm sure Marianna has heard a lot of the same things, but you might not be surprised. For LGBTQIA voters, LGBTQ issues is obviously a really important issue that is on the ballot, and that means access to healthcare. It means teaching LGBTQ history in schools. It means protecting marriage equality, because there are certain members of the Supreme Court who have already hinted that they want to overturn our privacy protections in order to be able to overrule practices of interracial marriage and same-sex marriage. So
Right.
I think that is absolutely something people recognize is on the ballot. We recognize that our humanity and our dignity is on the ballot. The ability to be treated as fully human for us is on the ballot. And for a lot of people for whom this could be quite literally a decision between life or death in terms of accessing healthcare, for example, I think this is one of the top issues that LGBTQ voters will be voting on. Abortion and economy and education are obviously other very important and interconnected issues. I would say that for economic concerns, I broadly hear from anecdotally speaking, I broadly hear people talk about how expensive things are, how my generation worries that we'll never get to own a house, we'll never have a stable future. A lot of people in our generation, because we're being saddled with student loan debt, are not able to start businesses, start families, have kids, and those have historically been such a critical part of the American dream that our generation is being denied that. LGBTQ voters, just like everybody else, want the same things. We want to be able to have loving families, be in loving communities, be accepted for who we are, work meaningful and fulfilling jobs, and retire with dignity. That is the thing that I think almost everyone in this country wants for themselves and for their loved ones. And fighting for that future also means prioritizing economic issues and recognizing that even though economic issues broadly are a huge concern for the American public, for the LGBTQIA community specifically, we grapple with really salient problems of hunger, of poverty, of homelessness at disproportionate rates. We know that a lot of young people, because of bullying and harassment, will end up dropping out of high school or never going on to college. A lot of people are cut off from their families and experience homelessness, housing insecurity, food insecurity, and are not able to afford to go on to colleges. And a lot of young people who are in colleges right now in red states, like I went to college in St. Louis, Missouri, love St. Louis. St. Louis is a wonderful city. Missouri, on the other hand, very hostile towards LGBTQIA rights. It can be really difficult for somebody there. I know a student who transferred out of WashU because they just need to go to a state that had protections for gender-affirming healthcare, because our Attorney General in 2023 tried to get rid of gender-affirming healthcare for everyone across our state, right? So these practices and these policies are really front of mind, but these economic issues are deeply interconnected with these social issues. Reproductive freedom is another great example. If you aren't able to get the healthcare that you need, if you are worried about whether or not you're going to have to risk your life in order to get the reproductive health care that you need. When we have states like Missouri, for example, where the maternal mortality rate is 3 times higher than national average, and the Black maternal mortality rate is even higher than that. I mean, it's a rights issue, a health issue that people are going to be motivated by when deciding where to go, but also who they're going to cast their ballot for.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we moved here from Texas, Austin, love Austin, love Dallas, love Houston, love San Antonio. But we did move here because we were concerned. Our kid wasn't even out, and we were concerned about them having autonomy and feeling safe. So we moved here for their college days. Marianna, how about you? What are two for voters tomorrow? What are the two or three things that you're hearing? I know you talked a lot about reproductive rights, but what else are you hearing about?
Yeah, so right in line with the Springtide research, we at Voters of Tomorrow also do polling of Gen Z, specifically Gen Z voters, and we see that the top three issues for young people are the economy, specifically the cost
Yes.
of living, access to abortion, and reproductive health care, and healthcare more generally as the third issue. And we do see education really high on that list historically as well. But we've been seeing these issues at the top of the list in terms of vote choice for the last 2 years. This is a pattern now. But we're not just seeing these issues at the top of the list for young people. These are at the top of the list for every demographic of voters, right?
Right.
So young people are not a monolith. They're definitely ranging in their interests, but they're also not unlike the rest of the electorate. We want to be able to afford a decent quality of life on a simple normal job and go to have the typical American dream life, right?
Right.
And so when it comes to what young people want to see in this election, I do think it really is tackling the cost of housing. Rent is incredibly expensive in a lot of major cities where young people are maybe starting out their careers or getting jobs after they finish college, or maybe they're like Raymond was saying, a lot of young people don't go to college. So for those that don't go to college, also being able to get a good job that pays well enough to afford their rent, to afford their groceries. And then abortion, I think, is a really interesting issue because it is healthcare, right? Abortion and healthcare, we see those as issues 2 and 3 are so deeply intertwined. And like Raymond was saying, I think people really view this attack on abortion access as an attack on access to healthcare and rights more generally. We know that the overturning of Roe has led to challenges for gender affirming care, for access to reproductive health care that maybe isn't exactly abortion, right? We've seen IVF threats. We've seen people having issues with their miscarriages and being left to bleed out and have to deal with those consequences of not being able to access emergency care. So when we're looking at these issues and we're looking why young people care about them, they want to be able to know that they're going to be able to access the care that they need or make the decisions that they want to make, should they be able to make them. They want to know that they're going to be able to afford to pay their rent and get their groceries and not feel like they have this massive amount of debt stacking up. Young people want to see themselves empowered in these decisions, right? This isn't an election that's about what decisions do we as Americans have the freedom to make? And I think that's the central thing at the core of every single one of these issues. Healthcare as well, just more broadly, thinking about the Affordable Care Act, there are candidates on the ballot this year who have threatened the Affordable Care Act and who have tried to go after it time and time again. Young people, people under 26, are able to stay on their parents' health care because of the Affordable Care Act. There are a whole lot of young people who will lose access to health care coverage should the Affordable Care Act be taken away. So this is about really just being able to access the things that we need in order to survive, and having the opportunities to live a normal life, to do the things that everyone has been told growing up are the things that you're supposed to do: go to school, get a job, get an apartment, buy your groceries, start a family, be able to do those things, and have the freedom to make decisions about them yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Or as I've been well informed from my own Gen Z, or not start a family. So
Right, exactly.
yes,
But also that's a
which is
decision
on
that's a
the ballot.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
who has more humanity? Someone who has the family or who doesn't. So you bring up so many good things, and I have to have you back. Um, so when it comes to these issues, these are deeply felt things. feeling, having insecurity about your income, having insecurity about your autonomy over your body, having insecurity about the climate and all the other things. These are very felt things. Um, and when you talk about being so born into this political conversation and these really political highs and lows and divisiveness, many young people have concerns and doubts about the effectiveness of voting. I have had that just even as a person who speaks a lot about Black autonomy, a lot of Black people who have said it doesn't work, voting doesn't work. And I'm just like, but it does, because if it had been a different president other than LBJ, who knows what would have happened with the voting acts right in the 60s. It does matter. Particularly, I always say this at the local level. When you see these videos of who's on the school board, it's like, well, yeah, vote for that. You gotta vote to make sure that these things don't happen. So it really does matter. Voting really does work. And it's really, I say, when people are concerned about the effectiveness of voting, I say it's not the effectiveness of voting, it's the effectiveness of the non-vote. The effectiveness of the non-vote. The people who are sitting out of voting are the people that we need to reach, because it's very effective to not vote, because then you do get the candidate that you're like, where'd they come from? It's like, well, didn't vote. So I would love to hear what your message is for young people who may feel disillusioned, and particularly with everything that's happening in Gaza. I know that there's a lot of disillusionment on there. I know there's a lot of confusion on how to vote the most humanely, how to cast the most humane vote. And people are disillusioned about political candidates. I'm just going to give my opinion. I've said it before. I don't think that Dr. King and people in the 60s, Black people in the 60s, loved their options. I really don't think so. I think they voted for who they felt they could get further down the road with. So that's my take. That's it. That's my comfort for you. I'm not trying to have a beer with none of these candidates. Not a one. I got people to have a beer with. I'm not going to have a beer anyway. I'm going to have a cocktail. But I have people for that. I don't need them to be my buddy. I just need to know that I can get closer to the vision that I would like to see for myself and for my loved ones and for my community. So, what message do you have for young people who may feel disillusioned by political candidates and process it as unfair, dishonest, or see them as being out of touch? Because I definitely believe that this isn't new to the American, political machine, but I think because we're online, we just have more conversations about it. So if each of you could do that, I'm going to start with you, Marianna, this time. If you could tell me what message do you have for young people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, elections are a choice in so many different ways. It's a choice of whether or not to vote and who you're going to vote for, right? So I always say, at the end of the day, somebody is going to be in that office making those decisions. If you want a voice in those decisions, voting is your way to make that happen. If you don't see a candidate, if you're looking at local offices, if you don't see a candidate for your school board race that looks like somebody that you want to see, you can run for office too. We absolutely encourage young people to run for office and to take the issues that they care about and make them a part of the conversation. Our former Georgia state president, Bryce Berry, is actually running for a state seat in Georgia, and he's going to hopefully be the first member of Gen Z in the Georgia legislature this upcoming. Yeah, we're really, really excited about the fact that he decided to run for office. He's a teacher. He's a young person who is looking around at the world and saying, you know what? I have something to say here and I want an opportunity to say it. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to run for office and I'm going to go and help and serve my community, right? So I think for young people, yeah, you might not agree with everything that the candidate that you're voting for has to say, but you have power to make this decision, and you have power to also hold that person accountable if you do vote for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also want to see candidates who are serving the issues that we care about, and if they're successful and if they can deliver on the things that we care about, that gives us a reason to come and vote for them again. And if they're not, we're going to find somebody who does care about the issues that we do, right? So in this election and in every election up and down the ballot, there's an opportunity for you to make your voice heard and for you to make things a little bit closer to what you want to be or to what you want to see. And if that option really isn't there, you can also run for office yourself, or maybe find someone in your life who you think really should be there. We have a running joke in my family that one day my dad will run for city council because it's something that we all see him doing. And it sounds sort of like crazy to think about, like, oh, you can just run for office, but you can.
Yeah.
The people that represent you are people from your community. You are in your community, and you have an opportunity to get out there and represent the things that you care about and fight for them.
Love it. Jaclyn, I'm going to come to you. What comfort or how can you, what message do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting thinking about the research that we were doing, thinking about the interviews that we had with young people. Um, it, some of them were like, voting is the most important thing that we can do, and I vote in every single election, right? And then others were, a little bit more unsure, a little bit disillusioned, like you said. Um, so, thinking about how to engage with both of those types of voters, both of those types of young people in the US is really interesting. At Springtide, we really think about listening to young people, speaking with them, and getting this information out. And, to adults and to organizations like Ranen's and like Marianna's, to, encourage this or to encourage civic engagement. And hopefully the resources that we have are helping with that.
Oh, love that. And last but certainly not least, Ranen, what would you say what's your message to to young people who are feeling disillusioned and just fed up and done?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, completely understand that people are disillusioned with the political process. That's the whole reason why we need to fix it, right? But I would tell the same thing that at the start of this live, which is if your vote didn't matter, people wouldn't want to take it away from you. And the
So
fact
true.
actively seeking to suppress the vote of Gen Zers, of LGBTQ people, of people of color, means that we have a lot of collective power that we can unlock by turning out to vote and making sure that our voices are going to be heard. I like to tell a story. Actually, this election cycle, 2024, in California, there was a race for a gay candidate named Evan Lowe, and he would be the first Asian candidate to represent his district, the first gay candidate to represent his district. He won his primary and advanced into the final primary by 5 votes in a race in which over 100,000 ballots were cast. 5 votes.
5 votes.
This is the more wild thing, is that in the first round of voting, it was tied. He and third place were tied. So they had to do a recount, and then he just narrowly made it ahead by 5 votes. In 2022 and in 2020, there were over 100 races across the United States that were decided by less than 100 votes. The fact that you turn out and you vote is going to make a huge, huge difference. And I don't remember who said it earlier, but voting is a privilege. It's not something that everyone gets to experience. My parents are 2 immigrants from China. As you all may know, China is not a flourishing democracy in which everyone has to ballot for who's president. So I am taking that with me as I step into a ballot box and recognize that it is an incredible privilege to have a voice and a say in who represents you and who makes decisions at the governmental level. In 2020, 80 million people in America did not vote. If that number changed slightly for either direction, the outcome of the election could be completely different, along with all of those down ballot races.
Yes.
If everyone voted, we would have a robust democracy. We would all have a greater connection to the decisions that are being made. We would all be more engaged in our society. And that's why OutVote is doing work that's not just about voting, but about civic engagement. Right. It's about running for office. Just like Marianna said, I think that's so important. Our exec board member, Armando Montero, I want to give him a shout out. He's, when he first ran for school board, became the youngest school board member in Arizona. He won, I believe, when he was 18 or 19, and now he's the school board president in his early 20s, right? So young people absolutely have a right to run, and we should be very comfortable taking up that space and going to represent people. A friend of mine, Sydney Zulik, is a city council member in Bloomington, Indiana. She's the youngest, first Gen Z person to win that seat, right? Incredible representation to be able to have in these decision-making calls. And all of young people are running. So I'm just encouraging people to run. I'm encouraging people to protest, to sign petitions, to know that November 5th is just one day. But every other day after that, we are still engaged citizens in our democracy. We still have a stake in what happens in our government. And voting is just one of the civic practices we should be engaging in order to make our voices heard.
I'm going to go back to you, Marianna.
Yeah, I would love to add one thing onto what Raymond was saying, which is that also for the people that are probably watching this and that are engaging with organizations like ours, they're politically engaged already, right? They're already gonna vote. They know what they're doing. But you have so many more opportunities to get people in your lives involved and to get people in your lives to care about this. We know that the most effective way to convince somebody to vote or to persuade someone to vote for a certain candidate is when they're talking to people that they love and trust. It's a tactic that we call relational organizing, but I think everyone also needs to realize how powerful that they are as individuals. You have a lot of influence over the people in your lives that care about you, that you care about, that trust you, that you see every day, people at school that you sit next to in class, people at work who are your friends and colleagues, cousins, aunts, uncles, whatever it may be. You have the power also to have these conversations with those folks, right? We can persuade our friends and family who we see every single day to go and turn out and vote, even if we say, hey, I'm going to go vote tomorrow. Do you want to come with me? Simple things like that. But also, you have a lot of power in the way that you spend your time and energy, especially during an election year. If there's a candidate or a cause that you care about, you can volunteer with those candidates. And make sure that you're contacting other voters about what's at stake and what's in this election and who's on their ballot and how they can get that vote cast. And you can also, if you have the means to do it, you can help fund your candidates that you support and care about by donating or causes or ballot initiatives, things like that. But there are so many different opportunities for everybody to get involved, no matter what your financial ability is, no matter if you don't have the time to volunteer, understood. But like you still have those conversations with your friends and family members. Even just doing that is an incredibly effective way to have a little bit more impact and have a little bit more of a ripple effect in the way that we get young people out to vote and we get people involved.
Absolutely. This is we're going to round it out, and you guys can get back to your lives and the beautiful things that you're doing with them. And I'm so excited to have had the chance to have this conversation. It's been a privilege to speak with each of you. What do you want people to understand? Like, what is a practical tip to implement when it comes to supporting young people's civic engagement, specifically through voting? I'm just going to answer. One of the things I want every young person to know is that it's just my little practical thing. Well, it's not my little thing. I didn't come up with this, but your vote is private. This is between it is for you and you alone, and no one's gonna know who you voted for or where you cast your ballot. And if you don't want to share that with anyone, you don't have to. You can go and vote, and you don't. Nobody needs to know who you actually cast your vote for. So, because I know a lot of times if you're a young person and you're isolated in a community that might not stand where you stand politically, that might be intimidating for you when you about whether or not you're going to go vote. Go vote. It's no one goes in that booth with you, not a single person. It's not like a revolving door where someone can shuffle their way in and move through it with you. It's just you get to go to have that vote. It's for yourself, no one's business. It is completely private. So just want to put that out there. I will start with you, Ranen. What practical tips to implement when it comes to civic engagement, specifically through voting? I love everything that you guys said about you can run. So, but what are some of the practical tips or that you might have?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm sure Marianna and Jaclyn are going to say the same things. Make a voting plan. This is the best way to make sure that people are actually going to go and vote. Google where you're going to go vote, or create a plan of how you're going to vote if you're not able to go in person on election day. So how are you going to get a mail-in ballot? How are you going to make sure that to reach your election office in time? Making a voting plan is one of the most effective ways to make sure you will actually follow through and go out and vote. Number two, bring your friends, right? I think this was a great tip. Making voting a social activity and telling people who you love and who you know, let's go vote together, is one of the most effective ways to amplify the impact of your vote. One of the things that we ask people to do when we phone bank is we ask people to vote triple. We ask them to bring 2 of their friends to go vote with them, or to tell 2 of their friends to go out and vote. This will help to circumvent some of the bigger challenges people might experience, like transportation, for example, to and from the ballot box. And if you are interested in getting involved or getting a Lyft voucher to go to the ballot box in your state, you can go to tinyurl.com/outvote 2024. We're with the HRC Pride to the Polls campaign to get Lyft vouchers to folks so that you can go out and vote. Number 3, I would make sure to look at your workplace, look at your school, find a time and slot that you're able to go out and vote, because a lot of people get really boiled up in everything that's going on in the day, and then suddenly they forget, and it's the end of the day, right? And lastly, remember that you stay in line, and even if the as long as you are in line by the time that the ballot box is closing, you are still able to go in and vote. So stay in line, don't leave just because it hits the end of the hour. You are still eligible.
That's really good to know.
Thing to remember. One last thing that I'll add is I'm a big believer that when we have conversations with our communities, when we invest in the leaders that we have within our own communities, we're able to much more effectively turn people out to vote. And OutVote's model is distributed organizing, which means that we are relying on local leaders and investing in local leaders to go out and do this work, instead of trying to swoop in and send in, people from out of state to go into different places and mobilize people to vote. I want everyone to remember that you have a lot of power in your community, and that your vote is going to be really important no matter what type of state you live in. I also hear from people often that my vote doesn't matter. I live in a red state. My vote doesn't matter. I live in a blue state. But remember, there are so many local elections we've been talking about this entire time, including nonpartisan school board elections, including city council elections, including legislative elections. At any point in America, there are thousands upon thousands of elections happening. And I have friends who are running for school board in Missoula. I have friends who are running for city council in Omaha. These might be, cities that are politically different from their surrounding state, but these are places in which a lot of change is going to be happening. St. Louis is a perfect example where there was a robust interracial, intergenerational protest culture and a really, really amazing movement of people who are fighting for shared dignity and solidarity across people from different identity groups. So I think that it's important for people to remember that no matter where you are, you can go out there and make a difference and vote.
I love that. I want to go to Marianna.
Yeah. I think Raymond hit a lot of the big points there, but I will also say, for a little piece of advice to older folks who care about young people, I think my first piece of advice is invest in them. Again, whether that's time or money or manpower, make sure that you're having conversations with the young people in your lives who maybe haven't made a decision about voting yet or haven't made a plan to vote yet. Give them the time and energy that they need to be able to cast that ballot and get the tools that they need, or invest in young candidates who you care about, who are fighting for the causes that you believe in, or invest in mobilization efforts like Voters of Tomorrow and OutVote that are doing the work on the ground to get young people out and voting. Just like in any other proposition, if you want something to go well, you invest in it, and then when you invest in it, you get returns on that investment, right? What we want to do and what we want to see is Gen Z growing their political power, growing their representation, growing their ability to decide these elections and to influence policy once people get elected, right? So if you care about young people having a voice and being a part of this political sphere that we're living in, invest in young people, put money and time and effort behind them.
I love that. And speaking to the whole investing in people and investing in young people, and also to the voting in threes, it used to be a celebration. The history is that you used to get to the voting ballot and it was a party. Like, there was music and this, that, and the other. We were so far from that now. But that doesn't mean that we can't make it a day that's special. It doesn't mean that we can't brunch. It doesn't mean that we can't kiki and have a good time, or even have a post celebration, like everyone show up to your place with their little sticker, and that's the way they get into the party, and you guys get to have a good time watching the well, it's going to be tense, but at least you'll be with others watching the votes roll in. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but making a plan, I think, is really important, and investing in the people that you care about. Like, if you care about young people, you got to invest in it. Last, will you give us a word from Springtide on this, practical tips to implement and supporting young people in their civic engagement? Jaclyn.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of echoing what Marianna's been saying, at Springtide, we think a lot about relationships and about trusted relationships with adults that young people have. I think, I don't know, just in my life, I hear a lot of old adults older than 25, right? So our age range goes up to 25. I hear a lot of older adults saying, oh, well, young people are just giving up, or they just don't care. And I think that our research really suggests that that's not the case. I think the young people care a lot. They care a lot about the issues. They care a lot about what's happening in our country. So maybe for, again, adults who are caring about young people and want to engage with politics and civic engagement with them, creating those sorts of relationships where you can do that. I think a lot of young people in our interviews were telling us that adults don't listen to them, or they tell them that they're wrong, or they're very dismissive of their opinions and their views. So I think kind of developing some of those trusted relationships, showing in the conversations you're having with young people that you are listening and that you do care about them as people, and then also about the issues that they care about, or at least are validating of those issues that they care about. I think that's one way that intergenerationally we can think about young people engaging with young people when it comes to civic life.
Yeah, and it's fun, y'all. I've had the best conversations with, my younger generations, millennials, because I am a Gen Xer, but I've had conversations with millennials. I've had conversations with Gen Zers. It's just such a richer way of living. I promise you, you are not gonna. It's gonna be better. You can only go so far with people who are just in your own echo chamber. You need to just get outside of that. So I really thank Springtide for putting this together. You can follow, I will put all the information into the notes beneath the live. And I will tag each of your organizations so that we could collaborate on this. But I'm really honored to be invited into the conversation. I also would love to have each of you back more than once, because first of all, I would love to have each of you back before the election, but I really would like to do that post-election, because as we have stated here, it's not just this election. There is a civic life. And I think a lot of times that the reason that we get here is because we're only looking at the every 4 years. Well, it's not the Olympics. This is like our lived experience. And we need to find a way to make a plan for how we're going to be civically engaged. So I would love to have you back later, afterwards, but before as well. So you each can talk about, Springtide can talk more about what they're doing, the Cultivating Care report. Ranen, you can talk more about OutVote, and Marianna, you can talk more about voters tomorrow. Are you guys open to that? I'm putting you on the spot because, like, I'm asking you, it's kind of hard to say no. And I'm just going to bug you until you say yes. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. Sorry for the guffaw earlier. I don't know what happened, but both parts of the conversation will be in my feed, and I will tag everything in both parts, part one and part two. So thank you. And you guys have a great day and get out the vote.